August 21st, 1942, the Tinaru River, Guadalcanal. Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki stood at the edge of the jungle watching his 9016 elite soldiers prepare for the assault that would, in his mind, shatter American resistance on this miserable island. His men were among the best Japan had. Veterans of China and Malaya, trained in night fighting and bayonet charges. They had studied American tactics and found them wanting. The Americans relied too heavily on firepower and not enough on spirit. In close combat, in the darkness, Japanese steel and determination would prevail. Ichiki had planned this attack meticulously. His troops would charge across the sandbar at the river's mouth in the dead of night, overwhelm the American positions through sheer ferocity, and prove that the warrior spirit of Japan was superior to American material advantages. What Ichiki didn't know was that among the Marines waiting in the darkness were men carrying Winchester Model 12 shotguns, weapons that could fire 9 .3 caliber pellets with each trigger pull, and could fire 6 rounds in 3 seconds through slam fire technique. In the next 2 hours, over 800 of Ichiki's elite soldiers would die on that sandbar, many of them torn apart by buckshot at ranges where the warrior spirit meant nothing, and American firepower meant everything. This is the story of how Japanese military doctrine collided with a weapon so devastating at close range that Germany had tried to ban it in World War I, and how the shotgun transformed the Pacific War from a contest of will into a demonstration of what happens when primal weapons meet industrial production. The Winchester Model 12 was not designed as a military weapon. It was a civilian shotgun introduced in 1912 for hunting and sport shooting. Its pump-action design was reliable and simple. Its internal hammer mechanism was rugged. But what made it special, what would make it legendary in military service, was a feature that Winchester engineers had included almost as an afterthought. The Model 12 could slam fire. If you held down the trigger and worked the pump action, the gun would fire every time the action closed. This meant a trained operator could fire all 6 rounds in the magazine in less than 3 seconds, turning the shotgun into a rapid-fire weapon that could saturate a target area with lethal projectiles faster than any other infantry weapon of its era. By World War I, the U.S. military had recognized the shotgun's potential for trench warfare. They purchased Model 12s, modified them with bayonet lugs and heat shields, and issued them to troops specializing in trench clearing. The results were so effective that Germany filed a formal diplomatic protest, claiming shotguns violated the Hague Convention by causing unnecessary suffering. The German government even threatened to execute captured American soldiers found carrying shotguns. The United States dismissed the protest with a counter-threat. Any execution of American soldiers for carrying legal weapons would result in immediate and severe reprisals. No American soldiers were executed, and the shotgun remained in service. By World War II, the military had refined the Model 12 into the trench gun configuration: a 20-inch barrel for maneuverability, a ventilated heat shield to protect the operator's hand during rapid fire, a bayonet lug, though this was rarely used since the shotgun's primary value was its firepower, not its use as a pike, and most importantly, the gun retained its slam fire capability. Each shell held 9 pellets of 0 buckshot, 33 caliber lead spheres weighing 53 grains each. At close range, this created a pattern roughly 12 inches in diameter. At 20 yards, the effective combat range for most jungle engagements, all 9 pellets would impact within a 24-inch circle. This meant a single shot could incapacitate or kill multiple targets if they were close together. And with slam fire, a Marine could put 54 projectiles into a target area in 3 seconds. The math was simple and brutal. No Japanese soldier, no matter how well trained or motivated, could survive that kind of firepower at close range. Japanese military doctrine in 1942 was built on principles that had proven effective in China and Malaya. Night attacks to negate American firepower advantages. bayonet charges to exploit Japanese superiority in hand-to-hand combat, infiltration tactics to get close to American positions before opening fire, Banzai charges, mass assaults designed to overwhelm defenders through sheer numbers and ferocity. These tactics assume that American soldiers, soft and undisciplined compared to Japanese troops, would break when faced with determined close-range attacks. Japanese training emphasized spiritual preparation over material considerations. The Bushido Code taught that death in service to the emperor was the highest honor. Japanese soldiers were trained to charge machine gun positions with bayonets if necessary, accepting casualties as the price of victory. This mindset had worked against Chinese forces that lacked the firepower to stop determined charges. It had worked against British forces in Malaya, where Japanese night attacks had created panic and confusion. It would, Japanese commanders assumed, work against the Americans on Guadalcanal. But the Americans on Guadalcanal were U.S. Marines, and Marines had been studying Japanese tactics since the fighting began. They had noted the emphasis on night attacks and close combat. They had experienced the terror of Japanese infiltration, enemy soldiers crawling silently through the perimeter in darkness, appearing suddenly with bayonets and grenades. And Marine commanders had made a critical decision. They would issue shotguns to selected men in each squad, specifically to counter these tactics. The shotgun was not issued to every Marine. Ammunition was heavy, buckshot shells weighing more than rifle cartridges. The weapon was specialized, requiring training to use effectively. But every squad had at least one shotgun, and the men selected to carry them were veterans, experienced Marines who could be trusted to hold their fire until Japanese attackers were at optimal range. This distribution of shotguns throughout Marine units created something Japanese commanders had not anticipated. Every American defensive position had organic close-range firepower that could stop infiltrators and charges without requiring support from crew-served weapons. The Battle of the Tinaru River on August 21, 1942 was the first major test of this defensive concept. Colonel Ichiki's plan was sound by Japanese standards. His troops would mass on the eastern side of the Tinaru, wait for darkness, then charge across the sandbar in overwhelming numbers. The Marines defending the western side would be outnumbered, surprised, and in Japanese tactical thinking, psychologically unprepared for the ferocity of a Japanese bayonet charge. At 1:30 a.m., in near total darkness, the charge began. Over 900 Japanese soldiers surged across the sandbar, bayonets fixed, screaming battle cries designed to terrify defenders. For the first few seconds, it looked like Ichiki's confidence might be justified. The leading Japanese soldiers reached the Marine wire obstacles and began cutting through. But then the Marines opened fire, and the night erupted in a storm of firepower that Japanese tactical doctrine had never contemplated. Machine guns tore into the mass of charging soldiers. Rifle fire from M1 Garands added to the carnage, but it was the shotguns that turned the charge into a massacre. Marine shotgun operators, positioned at key points along the defensive line, waited until Japanese soldiers were within 20 yards. At that range, they could see the silhouettes of attackers against the slightly lighter sky over the ocean. They opened fire with slam fire technique, working the pump action as fast as their arms could move while holding down the trigger. The sound was distinctive, a rapid booming that was different from the crack of rifles or the stuttering roar of machine guns. Japanese soldiers charging across the sandbar ran into walls of buckshot that tore through multiple men with each blast. The 9 pellets from each shell spread out in a pattern that made precise aiming unnecessary. If you pointed a shotgun at a group of charging soldiers and pulled the trigger, you were almost guaranteed to hit someone. If you fired 6 times in 3 seconds, you were guaranteed to hit multiple targets. And at 20 yards, buckshot retained enough energy to penetrate deep into the human body, causing massive trauma that dropped men instantly. The Japanese charge broke apart, not because of lack of courage, but because of simple mathematics. They were taking casualties faster than they could advance. Men in the front ranks were being cut down before they could even engage the Americans with their bayonets. Men in the rear ranks were climbing over the bodies of their comrades, only to be hit themselves. The psychological impact of the shotgun fire was immense. Machine gun fire, while deadly, was something Japanese soldiers had trained to advance through. They expected casualties, they accepted that some men would fall, but the shotguns created a different kind of horror. Men didn't just fall. They were thrown backward by the impact of multiple large pellets hitting simultaneously. Entire groups of soldiers would go down from a single blast. The wounds were catastrophic, buckshot tearing through flesh and bone in ways that rifle bullets did not. And the sound, the deep booming in the darkness, was terrifying in a primal way that bullets whistling overhead were not. By dawn, the sandbar was carpeted with Japanese bodies. Of the 1916 men who began the charge, 1777 lay dead. Another 15 died of wounds shortly after. Colonel Ichiki, witnessing the destruction of his elite unit, burned his regimental colors and committed ritual suicide. The Marines counted their losses: 44 dead, most from the initial moments of the assault before defensive fire became fully effective. The kill ratio was devastating. For every Marine killed, over 17 Japanese soldiers died. And when Marines examined the battlefield, they found evidence of the shotgun's effectiveness everywhere. Japanese soldiers with wounds showing multiple pellet impacts, bodies clustered together, showing where a single shotgun blast had hit multiple targets. Some Japanese soldiers had been hit so many times at such close range that their bodies were nearly torn apart. One Marine shotgun operator, interviewed after the battle, described his experience. "I fired all 6 rounds, reloaded, fired 6 more, reloaded again. I must have fired 30 rounds in the first 5 minutes. Every time I pulled the trigger, I saw men go down, not one man, multiple men. The shotgun doesn't miss at that range. You point it at the enemy, and the enemy died." The Tinaru River battle established the shotgun's reputation in the Marine Corps, but it was in the months and years of Pacific fighting that followed where the weapon truly proved its value. Japanese forces continued to employ night infiltration and Banzai charge tactics, because these were core to their military doctrine and because they lacked the firepower to fight Americans at range. But they began to fear encounters with shotgun-armed Marines in a way they didn't fear other weapons. Japanese prisoners, when interrogated, mentioned the shotgun specifically. Some claimed it was an illegal weapon. Others described it as a terror weapon, something that created disproportionate fear compared to its actual lethality. But that perception was itself a tactical advantage. Fear reduces effectiveness. Soldiers who are terrified make mistakes, hesitate, break more easily under pressure. The shotgun created that fear in Japanese soldiers in ways that rifles and machine guns did not. On Tarawa in November 1943, Marines used shotguns to clear Japanese bunkers, the weapon proving ideal for the close quarters fighting in confined spaces. The buckshot would ricochet inside bunkers, hitting defenders who thought they were protected by concrete walls. On Saipan in July 1944, shotgun-armed Marines defended against the largest Banzai charge of the war, over 3,000 Japanese soldiers attacking in a massive wave. The shotguns, working in coordination with machine guns and artillery, helped break up the charge before it could overrun American positions. On Iwo Jima in February 1945, shotguns were used in cave fighting, their spread pattern proving effective in the total darkness of underground Japanese positions. By war's end, over 61,000 Model 12 shotguns had been issued to U.S. forces, and the weapon had achieved a legendary status among Marines who had used it in combat. The Japanese never developed an effective counter to the shotgun. Their tactical doctrine was too rigid, too committed to close combat and night fighting, to adapt to a weapon that made those tactics suicidal. Some Japanese units tried to identify and target shotgun operators specifically, but in the chaos of night combat, distinguishing between a Marine with a shotgun and a Marine with a rifle was nearly impossible until the shooting started. By then, it was usually too late. Japanese after-action reports from throughout the war mention the shotgun as a particular problem. One report from October 1944 stated, American soldiers with large-bore shotguns inflict disproportionate casualties on our charging forces. These weapons must be considered high-priority targets, but identification before engagement is extremely difficult. This suggests coordinating targeting, but provides no practical solution for how to do so in darkness when the shotgun operator is protected by his squad. The shotgun's psychological impact extended beyond the immediate tactical situation. Japanese soldiers captured after failed Banzai charges often mentioned the shotguns in their interrogations, describing them as the most frightening weapon they had faced. This wasn't because the shotgun was objectively more lethal than a machine gun, artillery, or flamethrower. It was because the shotgun operated at ranges where Japanese soldiers expected to have a fighting chance. A machine gun killed you from a distance. Artillery killed you randomly. But a shotgun killed you when you were close enough to see the enemy, close enough that you should, in theory, be able to fight back with your own weapons. The shotgun invalidated Japanese tactical assumptions about close combat in the most brutal way possible. It proved that American Marines, armed with the right weapons, were not just capable of holding their own in close combat, but could dominate it completely. The Winchester Model 12 continued to serve through Korea and even into Vietnam, where it again proved valuable in jungle fighting. But its greatest legacy was in the Pacific War, where it transformed the calculus of close-range combat. Japanese soldiers had laughed at American shotguns initially, seeing them as crude, unsporting weapons that real warriors would disdain. But those Japanese soldiers who survived encounters with shotgun-armed Marines quickly revised their opinions. The weapon that they had dismissed as a tool for hunting birds had proven to be one of the most devastating anti-personnel weapons of close-range combat. The 9 pellets of buckshot, traveling at 1/300 feet per second, didn't care about warrior spirit or bayonet skills. They just tore through human bodies with mechanical efficiency, turning Japanese Banzai charges from displays of martial valor into demonstrations of what happens when infantry tactics developed in the 1920s meet weapons technology that makes those tactics obsolete. When the war ended and military historians began analyzing the Pacific Campaign's effectiveness of various weapons, the shotgun emerged as one of the most cost-effective weapons systems deployed. It was cheap to produce, simple to maintain, required minimal training beyond basic firearm safety, and achieved casualty ratios in close combat that exceeded almost any other infantry weapon. The statistics were striking. In engagements where shotguns were actively employed, Japanese forces typically suffered casualties at rates 3 to 4 times higher than in similar engagements without shotgun presence. This wasn't because the shotgun killed more people than machine guns. It was because the shotgun allowed Marines to kill attackers at closer ranges, which meant fewer Japanese soldiers reached positions where they could inflict casualties on defenders. The shotgun created a lethal zone that Japanese tactics could not penetrate without massive losses. And those massive losses, accumulating across hundreds of battles and skirmishes, contributed significantly to the eventual collapse of Japanese defensive capabilities in the Pacific. The weapon the Japanese soldiers had laughed at, dismissed as crude and ineffective, had helped destroy the myth of Japanese superiority in close combat, and proven that in modern warfare, the warrior spirit was no match for 9 pellets of Zerad buckshot delivered at 1/300 feet per second.